Well, good evening. If we haven't met before, my name is Matt and I'm one of the leaders here. And if you've not been here for a while, welcome back. And if this is your first time here, you're also very welcome. But you have picked an interesting moment. We're temporarily here in Francis Holland School while essential work happens back at the church. And even when we return to the building in February, things will still be in progress for some time. That is our reality. But it's also a pretty good picture of where we are as a church, because as we're rebuilding the space we meet in, with dust and drills and dehumidifiers everywhere, as we start this new year, we're also taking a bit of time to ask what kind of church we're actually being built into. Not what we used to be, not what we're pretending we already are, but what God is building us into now. And so we've called this series Under Construction. Yes, it's a very clever name, to reflect both the work happening on our lower floor and our formation as individuals and as a community. And so over these next few weeks, we're going back to some core values, things like having an intelligent approach to evangelism, being open to the Spirit, richly diverse and radically inclusive. We're also going to touch on some of our shared practices and look at where we believe God might be taking us. And today, we're starting with our first value, having an intelligent approach to evangelism. And I do think it's right that this is our first core value as a church, because evangelism is us. It is us. We are a commissioned and sent people. Jesus says, "Go and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them and teaching them to obey everything I have commanded you." So yes, discipleship. Yes, teaching. Yes, justice. Yes, caring for people, but also unequivocally, yes, evangelism. If you have signed up to Team Jesus, this is what you have actually signed up to. This is what it means. And as you probably know, the word evangelism comes from the Greek word euangelion, which simply means good news. Evangelism is about heralding good news, the story of Jesus, his life among us, the meaning of his death, the reality of his resurrection. And at the center of that story is this announcement: Jesus is alive, and that changes what's possible for all of us. So when we talk about intelligent evangelism, we're not talking about being clever or having nice, neat answers to every question, although that may sometimes be part of it. We're really talking about thinking carefully about how we communicate and live out the life of Jesus in the culture we're actually in. Because if it really is good news, news that speaks to real questions and real lives and real longings, then intelligent evangelism is at its heart about taking people seriously. It's about trusting that if the Christian faith is actually true, then it doesn't need us to switch our brains off in order to believe it. And it doesn't require other people to either. Intelligent evangelism means being intelligent in more than one way: intellectually, emotionally, culturally, relationally, spiritually. And every generation of the church has to work this out for itself. When you read the New Testament, you can actually see this happening in real time. The gospel doesn't get frozen into one presentation. So in the New Testament, you can see three distinct proclamations. The first is with Jesus as he announces the kingdom to Israel. Then the apostles announce the risen Jesus to Israel. This Jesus you have crucified, God has raised from the dead, and we are witnesses to it. And then Paul takes that same good news to the Gentile world, starting from creation and meaning and resurrection. It's the same good news of Jesus, different starting points, which tells us something really important. The gospel doesn't change, but the way it's proclaimed does. And I think in some Christian traditions, we've sometimes got quite attached to very narrow presentations of the gospel. And even if you've never done this yourself, or you've been part of a church that did, you probably know the kind of thing I mean, where evangelism becomes like reading a tight script or walking someone through a tract. Well, you see, it's like this. You're standing on the edge of a cliff, and there's a chasm between you, but God's on the other side. And so Jesus comes down and he dies, and the cross becomes a bridge. Don't worry about that bit. You can just climb over that bit over the top. Just climb over. And you cross the cross by believing. So do you believe? Now, I'm sure that tracks have helped some people somewhere at some time. But for some of us, something inside us just quietly dies. Not because the message is false. Parts of it are actually deeply true, but because the way it's being said just feels strangely inhuman, rushed, reductive. And I want to say, if that jars with you, it's not because you're bad at evangelism. It's because you're human. And you know that the people you love, your friends and your family, are human too. And that a life-transforming encounter with Jesus probably shouldn't feel like a pitch. Now, thankfully, that is not the only way. That's not the only way. Just as people are diverse and numerous, so too are the ways we can speak about Jesus. And so, as I said, the gospel is proclaimed in 3 distinct ways in the New Testament, the final one being Paul to the Gentiles, the implication being that we, the church, in each generation would continue to find new ways to speak to the ever-changing culture we find ourselves in. Now, before we consider our own culture, I want to highlight a few principles from Paul's approach that I think are still relevant from Acts chapter 17, starting at verse 16. While Paul was waiting for them in Athens, he was greatly distressed to see that the city was full of idols. So he reasoned in the synagogue with both Jews and God-fearing Greeks, as well as in the marketplace, day by day with those who happened to be there. A group of Epicurean and Stoic philosophers began to debate with him. Some of them asked, "What is this babbler trying to say?" Others remarked, "He seems to be advocating for foreign gods." They said this because Paul was preaching the good news about Jesus and the resurrection. Then they took him and brought him to a meeting of the Areopagus, where they said to him, "May we know what this new teaching is that you are presenting? You are bringing some strange ideas to our ears, and we would like to know what they mean." All the Athenian and foreigners who lived there spent their time doing nothing but talking about and listening to the latest ideas. Paul then stood up in the meeting of the Areopagus and said, "People of Athens, I see that in every way you are very religious. For I walked around and looked carefully at your objects of worship. I even found an altar with this inscription, 'To an unknown God.' So you are ignorant of the very thing you worship. And this is what I am going to proclaim to you. The God who made the world and everything in it is the Lord of heaven and earth and does not live in temples built by human hands. And he is not served by human hands as if he needed anything. Rather, he himself gives everyone life and breath and everything else. From one man he made all the nations that they should inhabit the whole earth. And he marked out their appointed times in history and the boundaries of their lands. God did this so that they would seek him and perhaps reach out for him and find him, though he is not far from any one of us. For in him we live and move and have our being. As some of your own poets have said, we are his offspring. Therefore, since we are God's offspring, we should not think that the divine being is like gold or silver or stone, an image made by human design and skill. In the past, God overlooked such ignorance, but now he commands all people everywhere to repent. For he has set a day when he will judge the world with justice by the man he has appointed. He has given proof of this to everyone by raising him from the dead. When they heard about the resurrection of the dead, some sneered. But others said, "We want to hear you again on this subject." At that, Paul left the council. Some of the people became followers of Paul and believed. So let me just draw out a few simple principles from Paul's approach in Athens. Firstly, Paul is moved before he speaks. Paul finds himself in Athens, which at the time is the intellectual capital of the world. It's full of ideas, philosophies, gods, counter-gods, and people who are very confident that they've already thought this through. Does it sound familiar? Luke tells us that Paul walks around the city and his spirit is provoked within him. He is deeply unsettled by what he sees. He's not sneering, nor feeling superior. He is troubled because the whole city is searching and missing the thing that they are made for. And I think that's worth sitting with. If the first step of evangelism is being moved by Jesus, the second is being moved towards the people who don't yet know him, do you feel unsettled? Do you feel unsettled by the fact that people you care about are searching for meaning in places that can't hold this weight that they're putting on them? People who are being hurt by others, hurting themselves, exhausting themselves, looking for something that really is truly only found in Jesus. It's just a question. Now, for what it's worth, I think that Paul feels this because of his particular calling to the Gentiles, his wiring, his role, the spirit on him. Evangelists have a particular role in the church, but the task of evangelism belongs to the whole church. And I don't think that Luke includes this to say, feel exactly like Paul, but instead, pay attention to what happens when someone really sees the world God loves. And so what does Paul do with that unsettledness? Well, he reasons in the synagogues and the marketplaces. He engages with Epicureans and Stoics, people who fundamentally disagree with each other, but who are both united in thinking that we've already worked reality out. Eventually, they bring him to the Areopagus, which is the highest court in Athens. And just notice how Paul begins. He doesn't start by telling them how wrong they are. He doesn't start by quoting a Bible verse they don't recognize, and he doesn't lead with condemnation. He pays attention. He listens and he observes their culture. He notices their altars and their stories, their poetry, the things that they really care about. And so the second principle is Paul builds a bridge from where they are, not from where he is. Paul starts with their unknown altar to an unknown God. He's saying, you already suspect there's more. You already sense that something is missing. Let's take that seriously. Because I am here to say that there is a God. The God who created the whole world and everything in it. The God who gives life and breath. The God who made people to seek him and who is not far away. You know, or you worry something might be missing. And so you're covering all the bases with this altar and your rituals that you perform to this unknown God. But I say to you, what you're missing is the Creator who made you. Your life is not self-generated. You are not an accident. Your longing is not a flaw. Your restlessness is not random. And then Paul even quotes their own poets, using the voices that they already trust. He says, for in him we live and move and have our being. We are his offspring. That restlessness, that longing itch is only scratched when we seek the God who is not far away. You see, we're all cosmic orphans, really. And we only really find our rest, our home, when we find it in him. And at the same time, he gently dismantles the ideas that can't carry that weight. Gods who need propping up, meaning built on control or performance. Because if your God needs you to hold everything together, eventually life collapses underneath you, under the strain. Only then does Paul speak about Jesus and about resurrection and repentance and the claim that something has happened in history that demands a response. It's the same good news, it's just a different route to get there. And the response is mixed. Some scoff, some want to hear more, and some believe. And Luke doesn't tidy that up. He doesn't spin it. He just leaves it exactly as it is. So evangelism isn't about controlling the outcomes. It's about faithfulness. It's about loving people enough to speak in ways that they can actually hear and trusting God with what happens next. Paul takes their thinking seriously. He takes their culture seriously. He takes Jesus seriously enough not to hide him. That is intelligent evangelism. It's not a script. It's not a pitch, but a deeply human conversation rooted in truth, shaped by love, and open to whatever response comes. So, if that's Paul in Athens, what about us? Now, I think that we live in a moment that is probably best described as post-Christian, but it's definitely not anti-spiritual. Christianity is no longer the default setting in our culture, but spiritual hunger just hasn't gone away. If anything, it feels more exposed. People obviously aren't really asking, which church should I belong to in the way they might have in previous generations, but they are asking personal questions. Is there meaning? Can I be healed? How do I live with anxiety or guilt or emptiness or death? Is there something bigger than all of this? To me, the cultural air feels restless. Like a lot of people have followed the script that they were given, work hard, be true to yourself, build a good life, and have found that it hasn't quite delivered what it promised. Many are more anxious than free, more connected than ever, but yet quietly alone. And at the same time, people are suspicious of institutions and authority and organized religion, anything that feels like control or hypocrisy. And church as an organization often carries baggage. But here's the interesting thing, that while people are wary of institutions, they're often very open to experience. You can see this in Google searches each year. Open to prayer, open to spirituality, open to healing and ritual and belonging and transcendence. Which is why many people are curious about Jesus, even if they're cautious about Christianity. They may struggle with the label, the ethics, the church, and still want to know who Jesus is. And that openness is probably greater than we realize sometimes, especially among younger adults. So quiet revival, loud revival, not a mass movement, but a real shift in the spiritual temperature, a willingness to turn up before people would say that they ever believe. And I think if you ask why these questions are back, why openness is there, I think it's because a lot of people are living with the fallout of stories and that promised a lot and haven't actually delivered. And so there will be some people who just feel left behind by how fast the world has changed. And they're longing for some sort of stability, for order, for a sense that things make sense again. Some are deeply alert to injustice and harm, angry, often rightly, about systems that fail the vulnerable. Some are just simply exhausted by performance, by self-curation, by the pressure to be someone and to prove something and just to hold it all together. So different people, different politics, different instincts, but often underneath it's just the same ache, a sense that something is broken, that the stories we've been given don't quite hold, that meaning and belonging and hope just feel harder to come by than they were promised. And the Christian claim is not that Jesus ignores that. It's that God has done something about the shame and the brokenness of human systems by stepping into them. Jesus doesn't offer chaos or nostalgia. He offers order without oppression, and belonging without exclusion, and truth without cruelty, and grace without denial. When Jesus looks at the crowds in the Gospels, he doesn't sneer, he doesn't panic, he has compassion because they are harassed and helpless, like sheep without a shepherd. And he says, I am the good shepherd. And so for those longing for stability, a shepherd. For those disillusioned by success, deeper meaning. For those crushed by performance, rest. For those wounded by power, a king who lays down his life. For those hungry for justice, a kingdom that tells the truth about what's wrong and refuses to give up on the world. If your worldview was falling and failing and you knew nothing of Christianity like so many do, Jesus speaks directly to the honest longing and disappointment so many hold. And that's the space where intelligent evangelism matters. Not arguing people into belief, not pitching answers, but thoughtfully, confidently pointing to Jesus and trusting that he meets people right where their longing actually lives. And I think that part of the task right now, as it always has, is to do with plausibility. And so 20 years ago, the big question for many people was, is Christianity intellectually plausible? Can it survive Dawkins and the new atheists and questions about science and history and resurrection? Like, those questions still matter. And actually, Christianity really stands up it remarkably well. Many people, myself included, find it intellectually and emotionally satisfying. But I think the dominant plausibility question today is slightly different. It's not just, is this true, but does this work? Is the hope you talk about real? Is the peace you describe actually possible? Is the joy that you name something I could experience, not just an idea or in an ideal life, but in my life or a life like mine? A few weeks ago, I had the great privilege to speak to over 800 people at our carol service and trying to do exactly that. And I tried to engage with the culture, with the valiant ways that we cope, the emotional spectrum of our age, and speak honestly about Jesus and the surprising joy that I have experienced in loss and uncertainty. Now, on the one hand, I'm asking, does this sound plausible? Do you think I just believe fairy tales? Do you think that my experience could be true for you too? For all the reasons I made when speaking about our culture, I'm not trying to make someone agree with me in one evening, but I'm inviting them on a journey of discovery, to test, to taste and see that the Lord is good. And that is part of our journey as a church and why this value matters to us, because we can bring people on the journey. Can I invite the band to come up? This is why we run the Life Course. Which is our very best attempt to intelligently proclaiming the good news of Jesus. I know many of you will have heard about it before. You may have heard it at the carol service or been on it yourself. But for those who've never heard of the Life Course, I want to say it's a 7-week journey, a course to explore the meaning of big questions that many people are asking. And we know there's lots of other courses like this, but we have recognized that in our post-Christian culture, that has less Christian understanding, we can't just start with Jesus, we have to go further back. And so the first week, we actually talk about what meaning do we give our lives more generally. And then we go on to look about atheism, agnosticism, spirituality, all sorts of things that people are actually engaged with. And then we eventually engage with some of the Christian claims ourselves. And what I'd like to do is to invite you to come. First of all, if you are new to St. Mary's, you haven't been here before, this is the best way to integrate into the church. It's a great way to get to know some of the leaders. I'm going to be leading this course and speaking, so you'll get to see a lot of me and get to chat with me as well. But also, it's just, you get to know what we are about. It's a great way to connect with other people because we have small groups in the evening, so you get to know and go on a journey with a cohort of people who are also looking to integrate into the life of the church. Now, of course, there are people who we will have invited to the carol service. There are not 800 people in this room. And so you invited the people who you love, your friends, your family, the people who you wanted to say, this is my church, this is what I'm part of. And you may, what I want to put to you is maybe that you invite them to the Life Course. They would have heard about it from me, and I'd like you to extend that to them as well. So if you're here and you're new, you're invited to come along. If you have friends who you think might be interested in this as well, then please extend the invitation. Every evening it begins with food. We start at 7 o'clock in our small groups. There's a presentation by me about some interesting topics just to stimulate discussion, and then we break into our small groups where we get to go on this shared journey together. And what we do is we want to make this as accessible. We know that entering a church can be quite difficult for people, and we know that actually the conversation is going to be different as well. Because you might be thinking, well, actually, I've been a Christian a million years. Do I actually need to integrate into the church using this course? I want to say that this probably is the best way, not because you don't know the content, but actually, as we go into adulthood together as Christians, we hit suffering, we hit questions, we navigate things that we may have looked at as a child, but now as an adult, we don't know quite what to do with it. And it's good to have a context where we can actually ask questions as adults, to take our faith seriously, to see it as an intellectual task, an emotional task, a spiritual task. And so I would put that to you as well. And so what we do is we have groups for people who are exploring, people who they would just say, I might be spiritual, I might be atheist, I've never been to church before, and you can do that. And then obviously the conversation goes in one direction. If you're looking to integrate into the church, and you go, well, I think I'm a Christian, then you can go on that journey. And then we also have a group for LGBT people as well, who we also know that some people need the safety and the security just to be with people who are like them, particularly in a context where that's not always been the case. So that's the live course. I'm going to put that to you. We're going to pray for people in just a moment. If you would like to sign up for the live course, Sally and Kirstine are going to be at the information table over there, and you can speak to them. You can speak to me at the end. Can I invite you to stand? We're going to sing a song, and then we're going to pray for each other.